Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Dark Alpha's Fury by Donna Grant, narrated by Victoria Mcgloven. Chapter 1. He woke with his arms clutching her, except she wasn't there. She was never there. His hands felt empty, as if a piece of him were missing, had always been missing. Until her. Xanath rolled onto his back and fisted his hands, jagged rock digging into him. He still felt Aisling against him, still smelled her jasmine scent. He opened his eyes and stared at the grey sky. Smaller, wispy clouds drifted leisurely against the backdrop of larger, darker clouds. At least his headache was gone. They used to plague him often after he snuffed out evil, but they had ceased. At least, he'd thought they had. After the battle on the Isle of Skye, they had returned with a vengeance. How he despised them. They caused him to pass out, which left him vulnerable, like last night, or however long it had been since he'd fallen unconscious. He took a deep breath and slowly released it. Nothing had been the same since Skye. He'd had a chance to end the Fae Other's leader, but had opted to save Aisling instead of going after Lena. Xanath sat and bent his knees to plant his feet on the ground. He wound his arms around his legs and looked at his hands. He'd never felt so helpless, so powerless as he had when holding Aisling's dead body. He should have known that he couldn't do anything to help her. The rage and despair that had welled within him when he realized she had breathed her last had been more than he could handle. He'd been ready to destroy everything. For her. Then, inexplicably, she'd taken a breath. He'd been so dumbfounded that he could do nothing but stare at her. He'd almost gone back to her, held her, touched her. Then he remembered who he was, what he was, and he knew he had to leave. His mission was to eradicate evil, nothing more, nothing less. So he'd teleported away before he did something foolish. At least Aisling was alive. That gave him a measure of comfort, though he wasn't sure he deserved it. He fisted his hands once more and hung his head. Skye had been a disaster for him. He could have, and should have, ended Lena once and for all. The havoc the Fae had caused was unconscionable. How many more times would he have the opportunity to reset the balance between good and evil? How could he continue walking this realm, knowing he had let his personal feelings get in the way of what he was meant to do? Xanath got to his feet and looked at his surroundings. Wind buffeted him on all sides, the air heavy with the sense of salt, driftwood, and seaweed. Water met the horizon in every direction he looked. Beneath his feet, the rocky ground had patches of snow that clung to the last vestiges of winter. He scanned the desolate area, looking for any signs of life. Other than sea lions and birds, he saw nothing. Where was he? He glanced at the semi-sheltered area of rocks against the rising hill where he had been lying. At least he hadn't been left completely exposed. Not that the boulders hid him, but they were better than nothing. Xanath leaned his head to one side and then the other, hearing the pops as he stretched his neck. Then he looked up at the tall mound and its steep incline. It wasn't large enough to be a mountain, but it was by no means puny. He could teleport to the peak, but he needed movement after being unconscious, so he began the arduous trek upward. By the time he reached the top, his breaths came rapidly. The isle was small, maybe only a quarter-mile in any direction, and uninhabited. Perhaps that was why he had chosen it, though he had no memories of it. Other islands were near, and he could even see movement on some. Was he still in Scotland? Xanath tried to pull up his memories of what had happened after he left Aisling on Skye, but everything was blank. How many days had passed? Or was it weeks? How he hated the lost time with no way to account for it. His thoughts drifted back to Aisling. The moment he'd gone to Skye to join the Reapers and Druids in fighting the Fae others, he had sought her out, even when he knew he shouldn't have. They had stood shoulder to shoulder in battle, not because she couldn't take care of herself, but because he hadn't been able to stay away. She had followed him for weeks, and he'd demanded that she leave him be. She had finally given up and returned to the Reapers as he wanted. He should have been overjoyed, except he had been anything but. He should have kept his distance from her, but that was like asking the moon not to shine. Xanath thought of that battle and how he had known that Aisling had his back, that he could count on her, just as she had known that she could count on him. They had been in sync on a level he hadn't comprehended even existed. He had enjoyed fighting alongside her, as odd and ghastly as it was to admit. Since he had awoken from his torture at the hands of his aunt, Xanath had been utterly and completely alone. At first, he'd wanted to change that, but it didn't take him long to realize that he was something different, something to be feared. That was when he knew he had to stand apart from everyone else for however long he had left. Even the beautiful Aisling. Especially her. Because he craved to be near her. He fought it every second of every hour. His mistake had been going to her before the battle. Worse, he'd lifted her into his arms when he found her wounded. He swallowed at the memory of holding her. The feeling of her body had been imprinted on his soul, just as her exquisite face. He would never be able to forget her, no matter how hard he tried. Xanath glanced down at his damp clothes covered in dirt and blood. Aisling's blood. With a thought, he teleported to one of his safe houses that he'd once used when hiding from his aunt, Usile. At one time, he'd believed that was the darkest time of his life. She had been intent on erasing everyone in their family. He had been the last, and he had made it his mission to keep out of her reach until he could end her life. He'd been damn successful at keeping away from her, too. He'd become known as the Seeker, a fae who did business with both the dark and the light, something that just wasn't done. Yet he'd found a place for himself in that in-between world. He'd even become, if not friends, then friendly, with the King of the Dark, Baladin. They'd agreed to help each other kill Usile, since she had betrayed them both. Instead, Usile had captured Xanath and murdered Baladin. At least Baladin had gotten a second chance when death made him a Reaper. Xanath hadn't had that option. Usile had trapped him in his own mind, endlessly torturing him. He had finally gotten free, but it had been an accident. He'd been trying to end his life to stop the horrible cycle of torment, and somehow freed himself. When he went looking for Usile to exact his revenge, he'd learned that his cousin, Usile's own daughter, Rhi, had risen against her with the Dragon Kings. Though the Light and Dark Army had eventually killed Usile. Xanath would have loved to have been the one to take her life, but it was enough that she no longer lived. As for him, he knew his time on Earth was measured, and there was nowhere else for him to go. Whether Usile had changed him or he'd done it himself when he got free of her torture, he was different. Now he smelled the unmistakable, vile stench of malevolence. And once he did, he was compelled to hunt it down and end it. The Fae others reeked of such vast amounts of evil that it made him gag. The 6, 3 dark and 3 light Fae, had created the group modelled after the original others who had attempted to take down the Dragon Kings. Though the Kings had won and stamped out the others. Or so everyone thought. One Fae, Brian, had hidden, while 2 Druids were allowed to go free, because no one believed they could do any harm. Unfortunately, everyone had been wrong. Brian told certain Fae about the others, which then led to the Fae others' creation. Meanwhile, the Druids did the same. As concerning as the Fae others were, Xanath knew the one he needed to take out was Lena. She had learned to consume other Fae's magic, making her stronger and more powerful. She didn't need the other 5 with her to make her power move, so she had killed them and consumed their power as well. From the moment Xanath had laid eyes on Lena, he'd known she was the reason he was still alive. She was his objective. Already, she had killed tens of thousands of Fae to obtain their power, and then she brainwashed thousands more to join her faction. With the might she now harnessed, she could enslave everyone to her will if someone didn't stop her. Lena should never have been allowed to get where she was. No individual, be they human, Fae, dragon, or something else, should ever have that kind of power. It disrupted the balance of the universe in ways that rippled outward for generations. Xanath briefly thought about going to death. He knew Aerith wished to speak with him. Did she know something he didn't? He shook his head. That didn't matter. Death and her Reapers were particularly formidable. The problem was, they were on the defensive, and had been from the start. Death was the Fae's judge and jury, and her Reapers were her executioners, reaping their souls. For the most part, Aerith kept an eye on the Fae, but stayed out of day-to-day issues, until it was too late, as was the case this time. They'd had the clout to take down Lena when she was still part of the Six, before she took her companion's magic and killed them. Doing that had put Lena on par with Aerith. Though Aerith wouldn't battle her alone. Kael, her lover, was more god than Fae now. There was a chance Aerith and Kael together could defeat Lena. There was also a real chance they would lose. Both Aerith and Kael were important. Their lives had meaning. Xanath's didn't. He'd spent most of his life hiding from his aunt instead of confronting her. He was still hiding, though for a different reason. If anyone had to sacrifice themselves, it should be him. He had no one, no family, no friends. An image of Aisling filled his mind. He shut his eyes and shoved her away. When he opened them again, he blinked and looked around the cottage hidden deep in the forest. His magic made it appear as if it were in ruins, and if anyone stumbled upon it, they would fear it, the feelings convincing them to run away. The cottage might be small, but everything inside was pristine. He had spent a lot of time here. It was his favorite of his safe houses. Xanath snapped his fingers, and his filthy clothes and shoes vanished. He walked naked into the bathroom. He didn't look in the mirror for fear of what he might see. Had his coloring changed? Were his eyes now red since he had taken lives? It was better if he didn't know. He could use magic to clean himself, but he preferred the shower. He turned on the water and stepped beneath the spray. After scrubbing away the dirt and blood, he washed a second time before getting out and drying off, careful to keep his gaze away from any reflective surfaces. Then he went to the wardrobe. Inside was an assortment of clothing, from rags to royal attire. He grabbed a pair of dark jeans and a charcoal grey long-sleeve Henley. Once his boots were on, he ran his hands through his damp hair and felt how long it had gotten. He ran his hands through it again, using his magic to cut it short. As he turned away, his gaze landed on the bed. He paused and, for just a moment, let himself imagine what it would be like to see Aisling waiting there for him. He could picture her on her side, watching him with her dark, crimson eyes as she held herself up on a forearm, her long black and silver braids falling to the side. She would run one of her long, blood-red nails along her bare thigh and over her hip as she smiled seductively. Xanath took a step toward the bed, but promptly halted. He shook his head to dislodge the fantasy. It had been a mistake to allow his mind to drift so. It was a slip he couldn't make again. He squared his shoulders and turned from the bed and thoughts of what might have been. Then he took a deep breath and searched for the stink of the Fey others. Chapter 2. Dragon Manor. Aisling's eyes snapped open on the scream that reverberated in the room. She sat up, gulping in huge mouthfuls of air before swiping at the tears that had fallen. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and dropped her head into her hands. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. She listened for footsteps in the corridor, hoping and praying that no one came to check on her. As each second passed without the sound of anyone approaching or a knock on the door, she let the tension ease from her body. It didn't matter how long she lived, how hard she worked to let go of the past, it would always have a hold over her. That was just the way it was for those who became Reapers. Being betrayed and murdered tended to do that. Aisling stood and padded barefoot across the plush rug to the mirror. She stared at her reflection, not liking what she saw staring back at her. She was confused and scared. Two things she'd sworn never to feel again. Yet here she was. Right back in the same situation that had caused her betrayal in the first place. When Aerith came to her and offered her a position with the Reapers, Aisling had almost declined. She knew it meant carrying around pain that might never dissipate. The only way to truly be rid of it was death. After everything she had suffered, that was what Aisling thought she wanted, the sweet oblivion of nothingness, the dark abyss. To this day, she wasn't sure what it was that Aerith had said to make her change her mind. The agreement had been out of Aisling's mouth before she even realized it. She could have taken it back, but she didn't. Then Aerith had held out her hand. As soon as Aisling took it, death had given her just a few tiny drops of her essence. Not only did Aisling return to the land of the living, but she also had more power and magic than before. She had taken her place with the other Reapers, and soon came to understand that it was what she had been meant to do. She'd found her place among them despite the endless suffering of the past she still carried with her. She forgot about it some days, but the nightmares always returned when she slept. Always. This time, it wasn't just the past that had filtered through her mind, it was also Xanath. Aisling fingered one of her long plaits. She'd started wearing her hair like this after becoming a Reaper. Sometimes she wore the braids down, other times she tied them back, and still others she gathered them atop her head. Despite the familiarity of her hair, something had changed on Skye. She was changed. She might not be able to put her finger on what it was specifically, but she felt it, nonetheless. She had died on the Isle of Skye. There was no mistaking that feeling. She had already felt it once in that instant before Aerith held her soul and made her offer. What had brought Aisling back? It hadn't been death. Aerith only held their soul that one time. If a Reaper died a second time, they were gone. So what had happened? Had it been Xanath? She had been told that he was the one who'd taken her from the battlefield, but if it had been him, wouldn't he have waited around? Wouldn't he have spoken to her? Those were the questions she had asked herself for the past 3 days without any answers. She was beginning to fear she would never get them. Maybe she wouldn't like what she learned if she did. At least, that was the argument she had with herself. However, she knew it for the lie it was. Aisling tugged off the band holding the end of one braid and used her fingers to release the plait. Once the hair was free, she looked at it. With a sigh, she began freeing the others. Once they were all unbound, she ran her fingers through her hair. It had gotten so very long. She debated cutting it short, but then decided to leave it. Aisling glanced outside at the thick snow. She wanted to walk in the dragonwood. The forest had called to her since her arrival at Dragon. After the nightmare, she needed to walk with nature, to feel the hum of magic centered in the woods. With a thought, her sleep clothes vanished, replaced by a thick black sweater, black corduroy pants, and black snow boots. She added a black coat, scarf, and a fur-lined cap, and then teleported to the dragonwood. She sucked in a breath as the frigid cold slammed into her. Winter didn't loosen its hold easily in the Scottish Highlands. Aisling started walking, the snow crunching beneath her feet. She and the reapers from her group had been on Dragon with Cale and Aerith since the battle on Skye, while the other reapers continued reaping souls. It would be her unit's turn next week. Until then, everyone waited for what was next with the Fae others, because there would be a next. Aisling looked at the tall evergreens covered in snow, the precipitation melting in the morning sun. Seeing the land covered in a blanket of white was a beautiful sight. The way the wind whispered silently made it seem like they were on another realm entirely. She stood and drank in the splendor around her. The 60,000 acres that belonged to the Dragon Kings were some of the prettiest in the country. She looked through the snow-laden branches to the soft grey sky that matched her mood. Try as she might, she couldn't stop thinking about Xanath. Where was he? What was he doing? Would he return? Why had he left her? He would fight Lena again. Of that, Aisling was certain. Would she be there to see it? To join in? That was the real question. Xanath had a way of finding the Fae others like the Reapers couldn't. For all she knew, he could be confronting them right now. A sound behind Aisling caught her attention. She knew without looking that it was Owen. He was one of the originals from the first group of Reapers, and when Aerith added more, Owen had taken over her unit as their leader. Owen had earned Aisling's respect early, but it was more than that. The Reapers, Death and Cale, were family. It had taken Aisling a long while to fully acknowledge that, but it was true. She loved them. She would die for them. And she knew they would do the same for her. "You don't have to keep checking on me," she said. Snow crunched as he shifted his weight.
"I disagree. I'm worried about you. We all are."
She didn't want to talk about what had happened, or her feelings, or worse, Xanath. "I didn't think I'd like Scotland this much. There's too much snow, but it's pretty."
"Nothing can beat our Emerald Isle,"
he said, a smile in his voice.
"But I agree. Scotland comes close."
"I don't think Lena will attack in Scotland again. We should stop hiding and seek her out." Owen made a sound in the back of his throat.
"You think we're hiding?"
"The Dragon Kings have a protective barrier around their land. We're here. So, yes, I think we're hiding."
"We're waiting."
Aisling jerked her head to the side when he came up beside her. He had moved so quickly and silently that she hadn't heard him. She stared into his quicksilver eyes, the colour moving like molten metal. "Waiting for what?"
"Several things."
He clasped his hands behind his back and looked into the distance. "If you have something to say, then say it." Owen sighed as he faced her.
"Lena had the opportunity to strike anyone. including Xanath. Instead, she aimed for you.
Lucky me. So what?
You're too smart to be this obtuse, Aisling.
She bit back her angry retort. Obviously, I'm not nearly as intelligent as you think I am.
You're letting your feelings cloud the obvious.
Let's cut through all this shite, shall we? Just tell me.
Lena targeted you. You are Xanath's weakness. It was a guess on her part, but she got her confirmation when he left with you instead of attacking her.
Aisling suddenly couldn't draw breath into her lungs. She shook her head. It couldn't be true. She'd know if Xanath... If he what? Felt something for her? He wouldn't talk to me. He pushed me away. You're wrong, all of you.
We're not, and you know it.
She sucked in a breath, her lungs filling with the cold air, making her cough. Owen briefly closed his eyes. When he looked at her, sadness filled his gaze.
Why did you leave to track Xanath?
A feeling. Xanath had asked the same thing. She hadn't wanted to tell him, and she didn't want to tell anyone else either. It was too much. It would expose too much of herself. Owen quirked a black brow.
What kind of feeling?
She wanted to walk away, to ignore him. But if she did, she'd have this conversation again. Maybe with him, or perhaps Cale. Possibly Erith. It was better to get it over with now. She looked away. I felt certain that someone needed to be with him, that he needed someone to watch his back.
And that someone was you?
Owen asked softly. Aisling shrugged nonchalantly when she felt anything but. I was wrong.
You didn't see Xanath's face on Skye when he saw you wounded?
Owen paused.
I did.
Her gaze slid back to her leader. She desperately wanted to know what he had seen, but couldn't get the words out. Owen took a step, moving closer.
Panic, helplessness, determination. Then he gathered you into his arms and vanished. I saw your injury, Aisling. I saw you.
She couldn't look away as she said, I was dead.
Aye. Yet here you stand before me now.
I don't know what happened. I've told everyone that. I woke in the cave alone. Owen nodded slowly and let out a long breath.
There's only one conclusion. He brought you back.
But how?
How does he find the Fey others? How does he see through our veils when none but the Reapers in death can? There is much about Xanath we don't know.
She glanced at her boot in the snow. He once told me he thought I came to kill him.
The way Lena reacts to Xanath tells me she fears him more than us, even over Erith. He could be the one to kill Lena, but she's going to throw everything at him to prevent that from happening.
He needs our help. Then Aisling recalled Owen's words. If she was Xanath's weakness, then she couldn't be near him. Lena could and would use her. He needs all of you. Owen was silent for a moment as he stared at her.
He needs you.
I don't want to be used against him again. Owen's lips twisted as if her words meant nothing.
You're too smart for that.
She narrowed her eyes at him. You can't be asking me what I think you are, not after informing me that I might be his weakness.
There is no might. It wasn't a guess. You're exactly that.
Owen said. his eyes glittering shrewdly. She recognized.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?